We're making education, families, and America great again. Here's Ray.
Well, welcome again to Ray Moore Live, and we've had 3 days on this topic, looking at the economy, the financial situation, and starting off with the founders' attitude toward paper money. And so here's what we're into. We're going to continue with it again today. We're going to really overlap and backtrack and repeat ourselves. We're getting a little less than 100 people coming on at night watching it, and I hope if you're watching us now and watching us later in the day on the archives that you will seriously consider our advice. Now, I'm not a financial counselor. I'm a pastor, but I have studied deeply in these issues really for the last 15 or 20 years as a layman. And I know the players, I know the leaders in the gold and silver movement. We sometimes refer to this argument we're making today as advocacy for sound money. Sound money is gold and silver backed currencies or gold and silver as currency. And that has been the historic role of mankind down through world history. Gold and silver have always been money, and they've always been the money of last resort. You know, for most of the history of mankind, they didn't have a capacity to have paper money. I mean, they didn't have paper. And so people had to use gold and silver as a medium of exchange. That was the money of the day. And then in modern times, really, since paper came into existence, people would use notes in lieu of gold and silver. But the gold and silver was always there. It was stashed in banks. And when they would do a note, they would transfer in payment of debt so much gold or silver in their accounts in banks or vaults and use a paper note, and it was a legal document, and that was how they did how the exchange took place. And then in modern times, and this is probably really since the Civil War days or before, we started using dollars, paper money, but they'd always had on there a silver certificate, which theoretically meant that you could exchange the paper for so much silver. Well, you can't do that now. You can't go into a bank today and say, hey, here's my Federal Reserve note. I want my silver and my gold. Not possible. And so the currency, the paper currency, is just sort of hanging in thin air. It's based on pure trust. We trust the government to make it right or take care of us. And it's all, the whole economic order is based on the good faith and credit of the U.S. government, which I'm sad to inform you is insolvent right now. And we have a $21 trillion deficit. And the president has called attention to it, and he's working overtime trying to right the economy. He seems to have done well with different issues that have sort of brought the jobs back to our shores. Business is booming. The economy is sort of buoyant right now, but the underlying fundamentals are not sound because the deficit's still there and we're spending more than we're taking in. So somebody's got to start addressing this eventually, or we're going to have serious, serious problems. And I'm reminding you again that Egon von Greyerz, Greyez, did an interview a couple of nights ago, which I looked at, and I hope those of you who are viewing this will actually take the time, only 30 minutes, and look at that interview. You can go to lewrockwell.com, and it was on July 24th, and the title of it was All Hell Will Break Loose with Record Risk. And he is extremely competent and respected, credible individual who is used, the very wealthy people in the world use him to store gold and some silver bullion. So that's one thing you can look at. Then we're going to take a minute and go back to 2007 in 2008 a movie that I saw several times called The Big Short. And I really hate to recommend this movie. It is an excellent movie, but it has so much profanity that it's hard to take. But I think if you're an adult, you might want to check this movie out with Netflix or some group if you haven't ever seen it, because it's a quasi documentary with actors explaining what really happened with the almost crash of 2007 and 2008. Really a powerful movie. And if they had just taken the profanity out, it would be excellent. It's does not have any salacious sex in it. So, that's not a problem. It's just a bad language. And I just can't imagine people talk that way. I should get off the language, but I'm recommending it with that caveat. As an evangelical pastor, I hate to make that such a recommendation, but it's too important for you to not look at it so you can understand what happened in 2007 and 2008. We nearly had a total meltdown in the economy. And this movie explains The Big Short, what happened. People realized it was coming and they shorted their stocks. And as a result, they were not destroyed financially in the crisis. But it shows how they bailed out the banks, and it was really a scam. Bush's Secretary of Treasury, Paulson, was involved in it. And it's really embarrassing to see what our government did. And it's accurate. And nobody was ever prosecuted or anything about all the nefarious things that they did behind the scenes to save us from the crash. But these men in the movie here, you'll see their pictures there. They saw it coming, and they were able to save some of their assets, and actually some of them became multimillionaires as a result of shorting their stocks. A short is where you have a baseline drop, and if you own stock and it starts really descending rapidly, there's an automatic sell off, and that way you don't lose everything. But usually some people will say, well, when you see when it drops like that, just hang in there, because it always comes back. Well, that happened in 1929. They had a 90% drop in the stock market, and it came back 25 years later. It took it 25 years for the stock market to recover from the crash of 1929. A lot of people don't know that. So people who didn't short their stocks in 1929 lost everything. And we had people who were billionaires, went from being a billionaire to poverty and standing in food lines overnight. And so this movie sort of describes that phenomenon, and I hardly recommend it, so you can understand what happened in 2008. A lot of lay people just do not understand what really took place. Egon von Greyerz and others are saying we may be facing something very similar, almost identical, in the next 2 or 3 months. Now, I surely hope that he's wrong, and he himself expressed that same concern, that he wants to be wrong, but he says a lot of the indicators show that indeed we might be facing something comparable. And we do know we have severe recessions every 10 or 20 years, and how long has it been since 2008? It's been about 10 years. So if the economy is not fixed, the same old problems roll back around. So that was the first thing I wanted you to look at, and ask you if you've been on for these last 2 days, you've heard me talk about this, and I'm trying to give you some ways to remediate your personal situation and take care of your personal situation. Now, most of you, I'm sure, are average middle-class people like me and my wife, and you don't have hundreds of millions of dollars to invest in gold and silver, coins or bullion, but you may have 5 or 10,000 that you could invest just as disaster insurance. That's what this is. We don't recommend for working people, middle class people, or even poor people to invest in gold and silver for an investment. Most people in those categories don't have investments. They just live day to day off their paycheck or savings or something like that. Look at gold and silver coin as disaster preparedness or disaster insurance, or look at it as like a savings account. Let's say you have $5,000 in cash in a bank, and you could take it out and convert it to $5,000 in silver. Well, that's a saving. Call it a savings account. You've made your $5,000 paper assets more secure by putting them into silver and gold. And I mentioned the money changer. Let's put them back up. Now, I'm recommending the money changer because we are familiar with them, and they are very reliable. And a lot of our family and friends have dealt with them, for the last 20, 25 years. Money changer. Okay, let's get that. .com. There it is. All right. Yeah. And leave that just like it is. And you'll see the phone number in the upper right column. And this is a very reliable gold silver broker where you can call and order just like you would go down to the coin shop or to the some brokerage house in your city. And you can actually order gold and silver coins or bullion from this man. He will not store it. You buy it, you take it. And one of the most important things I said yesterday to you is you take delivery. A lot of people want to buy gold and silver and keep it in some vault somewhere and let somebody else secure it. And that can be risky. Now, a lot of them are reliable. James Turk with Gold Money is very reliable. He has a gold storage. And of course, Egon von Grevitz has a vault where he stores gold, but he won't store somebody's $5,000 in small coins. The people that work with him probably have hundreds of millions of dollars in gold. So Franklin Sanders with the money changer, back to the money changer, is for the small investor, or let's say the small man and the small family who wants to have $5, $10, $50, $20,000 worth of gold and silver coin in reserve as sort of disaster preparedness. Now, remember, people say, "Oh, I don't know, what would I do? I'll take my cash and I'll put it in gold. And what if I need it?" Well, if you need it, you can sell it back to him. He goes both ways. You can buy from the money changer, and he will exchange it and give it. You can send it back to him at the market price of that particular day. But the point is if the paper evaporates and goes away and becomes worthless, and that's what's happening to the dollar. I mentioned yesterday that the dollar, since the founding era, your dollar, and that's been the term for our money since George Washington, has lost 97% in its value. If you'd had a dollar in 1789, let's say, if it was around then, it would have been almost 100% more valuable than it is today. And the inflation is eating up our dollars, and it's so slow that we don't realize it's happening. There are some graphs that show the purchasing. Well, hey, you got one right here, the purchasing power of the dollar. Yeah, great. That's since 1900. And really 1900 was about the time that the Federal Reserve System came in. And people say, well, they put the Federal Reserve System in to control inflation. No, they put the Federal Reserve System in to push inflation. And it's just the opposite of what they say. And this is what's happened to the dollar since 1900. And actually, the Federal Reserve System came into existence in 1913. And so they've inflated our money so that it's almost worthless. But it does have some value. And but not much. So if you want to preserve the value of your money, you can convert it and some of these people are saying that if we have a severe downturn like we did in 2007 and 2008, in the Big Short or the Great Meltdown of 2008, and they're not able to bring it under control, and they might not be able to next time, that the value of metals would skyrocket because it will be the only money that was of any value. And some are saying gold and silver right now. I think gold is at about $12.30 an ounce, and silver is around $16 an ounce. I haven't looked lately. I probably should have looked before this morning, but I'm in the ballpark. It doesn't fluctuate much, and it's still pretty cheap. Silver, especially. If you had $5,000, I would urge you to invest in silver more than gold. So anyway, these are some things, and you can contact. And I need to state again, I don't get a commission from the Money Changer. In fact, they don't even know that I'm doing this program today, recommending them. But I have been recommending them off and on for 20 years. And one of the reasons they're good is they're honest, upright, they're Christians, and they have a lot of experience of over 30 years of doing this and dealing with the patriot movement, the Christian movement, homeschoolers, pastors, basically the conservative and evangelical movement. And I'm sure there are Catholics and others that deal with them as well. But he's a Anglican minister who happens to be a kind of a Renaissance man, Franklin Sanders, and he's a conservative theologically. He's not a liberal. And so I recommend him, and I'm not going to go back over it, but there it is again for you, and you can see the phone number. And if you have $5,000 or $10,000 in cash laying around the house, you might want to consider converting it before 2 months, because once the house is on fire, you can't buy insurance. Mentioned that yesterday too. People say, well, I'll wait and see what happens. Well, if you wait till the Big Short, you'll be too late. And you've got to buy insurance before the house is on fire. You can't get flood insurance after the flood comes. You can't get fire insurance after the fire comes. You can't get car insurance after you've had a major wreck and you're in the hospital and have hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills. You don't go buy insurance then. Nobody's going to insure you at that time. So if you want to wait until the crash comes, do it, and then try to buy gold, and you'll be paying $5,000, $10,000 an ounce for it. Okay, let's take some time remaining. I mentioned yesterday that we would look at the scripture. I've been talking 2 days without making a Bible reference, and I'm embarrassed at that. Should have done it. We believe that the fact that gold and silver are the fundamental money in God's economy. He wrote that into the DNA of the universe. It's all through the Bible. And he created gold and silver and put it in the ground. And he knew people would dig it up and they would turn around and make it a medium of exchange. And gold and silver have always had some sort of intrinsic value in and of themselves. People say, well, you could go out and make get rocks in the backyard and make them a medium of exchange. No, that wouldn't work because they don't have inherent intrinsic value. God put in his economy, which is where we all live and work, gold and silver in the ground. It would be mined. He knew that. And he created it as part of the created order. And it's always been his medium of exchange. And people have mined gold and silver and made coins since the beginning of history. You can go back and look at all the coins with Caesar's inscription, or Alexander the Great, or Hammurabi. I don't know who it would be. Nebuchadnezzar. They all had coins of some kind. And maybe before they were able to use smelting they maybe just had gold nuggets. But they had a way of weighing them in the old days. And we're going to look at some of the verses. First of all, let's look at Haggai 2:8. And this verse simply says, the gold and silver is mine, thus saith the Lord. So we can see that it was certainly a medium of exchange in the time of the restoration when the children of Israel came back from Babylon. It's always been a medium of exchange. The first reference to gold in the Bible is Genesis 2:11 and 12. Genesis 2:11 and 12. This is the very first reference. And it says here, now a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it departed and became 4 riverheads. This would have been, before the fall. And the name of the first was Pishon. The other one, which skirts the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And so this is the very first reference to gold. Didn't call it money, but apparently it was important that gold was there. And the gold of that land is good. And then he mentions some precious stones as well. So this is the very first reference to gold and in the Bible. I'm pretty sure of that. All right, now let's go to Leviticus 19:36. And the point we're going to be making here is that we can see that it was a medium of exchange. It was money in Leviticus. And that was money from the time of the beginning. It's always been God's money. You can't take leaves, say go get some banana leaves and make money out of them. It wouldn't work. You could say, well, we're going to make this our medium of exchange. Nobody would respect it. But they respect, it's sort of written on the DNA of the human soul, as it was written in the DNA of the universe. God said, my money is going to be gold and silver. And so we just instinctively know that. Nobody needs to tell us. We know it's valuable. And it's the money of final resort. So in verse 36, this is the Ten Commandments, not Ten Commandments, the Pentateuch. Moses wrote the Pentateuch. He said, you shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. What is he talking about? Well, they had either nuggets or they had coins. Not quite sure how the money manifested itself in those days, but they had to have scales. We don't have scales today. We don't need them. Our silver and gold are in minted coins, and they say on the coin 1 ounce or a half an ounce, whatever it might be, and that's on the coin itself. And so we trust that they are properly minted. They don't have alloys, and we don't need scales. But in those days, they would have scales, and they would actually weigh the coin to see if it indeed was accurate. And they talk about honest weights. Apparently, they had little bags, and the little bag was a certain amount of weight, and they were warned to have honest weights, not to put the wrong calculation in the bag and say, hey, this is a 1 ounce, but really it wasn't, and cheat their people that they're dealing with in exchange. And that's what this talks about. And the Old Testament theology for it was honest weights and measures. So and God held the people to that because he cares about, we know he cares about moral issues. He cares about the life issue, which all of us are concerned about marriage. We're also concerned about Christians being obedient on Christian education with their children. But God has a moral policy, a worldview on money. And he's concerned about just weights and measures. And this is all through the Old Testament. Now let's look at Deuteronomy 25:13. This is another reference, the same concept. You shall not have in your bag, I already mentioned that, differing weights, a heavy and a light. The bags were used on the scale. So you put the bag on one side of the scale and then the money or the coins or the nuggets or whatever on the other side. And it had to be accurate. And then you say, here, this is what I'm giving. This is what it weighs. And I'm paying you in this manner. And the weights had to be accurate. They could not be differing. And some people would have a tendency to say, oh yeah, this bag has got so much weight in it. and they would be cheating the person and lying. And I'm not saying that happened a lot, but this text shows that you can't have differing weights in your bag. And you shall not have in your house differing measures, a large or small. You shall have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. For all who do such things, that is, have inaccurate weights and cheat their fellow man monetarily, all who do such things, all who behave unrighteously, are an abomination to the Lord. Wow. I mean, he says, that's strong, isn't it? Yeah, he's saying, look, you deal fairly and uprightly with your fellow man when it comes to monetary things. Well, our government is not doing that right today. It's cheating the little man. When the inflation takes place, it benefits the banking class. And by the time the money gets to the working class or the little man or the middle class, it's lost its value. And that's what's happening to the dollar. And so that's why some are advocating a return to gold and silver as money. Let's look at one more text, Proverbs 20, verse 10 and verse 23. Diverse weights and diverse measures, they are both alike an abomination to the Lord. This is saying when you have inaccurate scales or measures and you're cheating people with the exchange and they don't know it, that's an abomination to the Lord. Verse 23 just repeats it. So he says it twice in the same chapter. Dishonest scales are not good. So this is why people now are urging a return to gold and silver. We looked at Dr. Edwin Vieira yesterday. We talked about James Turk and others. All right, let's stop at this point and see if there are any questions. We've kind of exhausted the topic, and I'm happy to take some questions or comments.
Ray, do you have an opinion about whether people should even be investing in the stock market today?
I wouldn't. If they're very wealthy, they might consider it in a careful way. A lot of people say even in a downtime, commodities will stay strong if you invest in natural gas, oil, agriculture. People will eat and they will drive. And so, but I would be careful investing in, I shouldn't say General Motors. I shouldn't pick on them. But if the very, very wealthy have a lot of diversity, but even Von Grerich yesterday said that his clients now, the minimum they have in metals is 20%, and some have 50% of their assets in gold. That's pretty amazing. A lot of people say, well, you ought to have 5% or 10% in gold and silver, and then have the rest of it in the stock market. So I don't invest in the stock market. I'm too poor. But so it depends on what kind of wealth you have, but I would say generally avoid it right now.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions real quick? We still have a couple of minutes.
Well, Ray, just to go back with that, with the video, The Big Short, it really does help you to understand how the economy works, right? I mean, you hear, oh, the housing market crashed, but why does that matter? Why does it matter if the housing market crashes? Why does it matter if the currency is devalued? Why is that important?
Right. And the movie, it's a true story. It's very factual, and I've done some research in it, and the main character in it was given he's a graduate of Stanford Business School. He was actually a medical doctor who had some kind of uncanny ability in investments and understanding the investment world. And he was working for a big brokerage house in New York and telling them what was getting ready to happen. And his bosses wouldn't believe him. And he was their paid guy. And so it shows the blindness also of the banking class. They just don't get it. This is an extremely important movie. And I just forgive me for recommending it with all the bad language. But if you want to understand what happened in 2008, you should see it. And if you want to understand what could happen again, and some are predicting a repeat of that, and it could be around the corner, you might want to look at it. Okay, I guess we're about out of time. I really have about 1 minute. I think I'm going to move to a new topic next Tuesday, and I'm going to be looking at a topic called, quoting President Lincoln's second inaugural address, which he said, to care for him who has borne the battle, for his widow and his orphan. And that actually is the motto of the Veterans Administration. I'm going to be looking at some situations, how the church should be operating and taking care of its people and taking care of its children, which we're not doing a good job of right now. So we're going to have a whole hour on Tuesday, July 31. Please come back and join us then. Okay, that's it for today. Let's close in prayer. Lord, we thank you for the fact that you do have answers. And you have not left us without answers. And we thank you for the scriptures that give us answers on almost anything we could think about. It even talks about money. Most of us have no idea of this. And so we thank you that you made gold and silver your money. You wrote it, you put it in the ground, you made it instinctively, intuitively. We know it's true. Even when people say, oh, you can use rocks or paper, we know that really your money is gold and silver. So help us to be wise and be to escape this crisis, if indeed it's coming to us in the near term. We ask you to help us be wise and be prepared. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it.